Ever heard of a guy named Jacque Fresco?
Oh, yeah,
So
definitely.
we're doing a deep dive into his life and his views on education. Fascinating guy, really.
Yeah.
Where he came from. Like his educational journey. It's a wild ride,
Mm.
full of these aha moments that really make you think. And to understand him, I think we got to start early on, like with his grandfather.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Imagine being young Fresco, right?
Yeah.
Soaking up his grandfather's wisdom. Now, this wasn't just your typical, childhood stuff. His grandfather instilled in him this deep, profound belief in the equality of all people.
It's true. It's like his grandfather's teachings laid the foundation for that global, inclusive perspective you see in Fresco's work, Like, he grew up understanding that everyone, regardless of their background, deserves basic respect, And you can see that woven throughout his later work, his designs, his ideas about how society could be structured.
Yeah, it makes you think, like how differently we might view the world if everyone had that kind of foundation.
Absolutely.
And then there's that incredible story about the Pledge of Allegiance.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Now, look, kids rebel, we get that. But Fresco, he flat out refused to pledge allegiance to the flag. And it wasn't just him being difficult.
Right.
He was challenging this idea of blind acceptance itself. What do you make of that?
I mean, he was a kid. But it wasn't about disrespecting America or anything like that, right? He needed to understand why things were done in a certain way. What's
Yeah.
the reasoning here? He didn't just want to go along with it blindly. And that questioning spirit, that refusal to accept things at face value, it became such a driving force for him throughout his life.
Yeah, yeah. And it really comes to a head in his history classes, right?
Mhm.
Can you imagine being his teacher? Fresco felt those textbooks weren't telling the whole story. Too many heroes, not enough.
Nuance.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. And this frustration with the history books, it reveals a key aspect of Fresco's thinking. He wasn't satisfied with these kind of one-sided stories, right? He craved nuance. Like he was always questioning whether any single narrative could ever really encompass the complexities of the past. And you could argue that this desire for multifaceted perspectives, for considering all sides, it's evident in all of his later work, always pushing for deeper understanding, never just accepting the simple answer.
Absolutely, yeah. And it wasn't just history, right? He carried that same attitude into every subject. It wasn't enough to just memorize names and dates. He wasn't content with rote learning. He wanted to analyze. He wanted to question. He wanted to really dig for those deeper truths.
He wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo, that's for sure.
Exactly. He really wanted to understand.
And that's where I think his frustration with traditional education really comes to a head. He clashed with teachers, not because he was a troublemaker, but because he wasn't satisfied with just memorizing facts. He wanted to explore, he wanted to make connections, and most importantly, he wanted to think critically.
And thank goodness he had that principle right.
Oh, tell me about it. What a difference a good educator can make.
Instead of punishing Fresco for, questioning things, the principal basically said, okay, you want to learn your own way, go for it.
It's unheard of, really.
It's incredible.
Talk about taking a chance on a student.
I know, right?
And the principal totally recognized and nurtured Fresco's intellectual curiosity. He gave him the freedom to learn independently. Heck, he even used his own money to buy books for Fresco, advanced texts, stuff that most students wouldn't even touch. And it wasn't just support, it was true mentorship.
Right, and what an impact it had. Fresco spent over a year, like a year and a half, essentially directing his own learning. It's
Yeah.
such a powerful example of personalized learning in action and what it can do for a curious mind.
It really makes you wonder how many other brilliant minds are out there right now being stifled by these rigid educational systems.
That's the question, isn't it?
And how can we encourage more educators to be like that principal, to take risks and nurture those curious minds?
Right. It makes you think.
Yeah.
If you could design your own education, ditch all the traditional rules, what would it look like? What would you prioritize?